Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
AI today is getting better at learning. In fact, learning is what differentiates what we call AI from advanced analytics. Machine learning algorithms minimize an error function by autonomously and iteratively adjusting their model variables. What's next for AI and machine learning? In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with James Canton, who in a meta-way makes predictions about this prediction technology.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars.
First, a little housekeeping. I've received feedback from some listeners when I've been on the road lately that my typical 1-hour podcast, well, it's a big investment, and that I should consider breaking it into more manageable pieces. So this is going to be an experiment, but that's what I'm going to do here. This is part 1 of the 2-part podcast, making predictions about the predictive tech of ML. However, I also had one person tell me it was a terrible idea, so I'd really like to hear what you think. The full episode with the show notes will always be available on iot-inc.com, but let me know about this 2-part breakdown for the podcast players. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Annoying or makes sense? I'm at bruce@iot-inc.com. This is the last episode of our 8-part mini-series on AI in IoT. It's been made possible by the ICIP program. If you enjoy the podcast, check out the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, that's a long way of saying ICIP, online training program. Become a certified IoT professional by taking the program's 3 courses, ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com/training. This week's ICIP graduate shout-out is to Vivek Shrivastava. If you're looking for an IoT boss for your organization, you can get to Vivek's LinkedIn profile from the front page of www.iot-inc.com. The first 6 of the first 40 graduates are there.
With me today on the IoT Show is Dr. James Canton. James is a futurist, business advisor, and author. He is CEO and chairman of the Institute for Global Futures and wrote the recent book Future Smart. For over 25 years, he's been speaking and advising clients on how to harness innovations to better compete. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
So how long have you been a futurist, and what are the credentials needed to be a futurist?
I've been a futurist for, 30, 35 years, I guess, though I started a little earlier. I actually had been a apprentice, if you will, to Alvin Toffler, who wrote a seminal book called Future Shock. Born and raised in New York, and I was part of an early group he had called the Anticipatory Democracy Network.
Okay.
And he had been a Fortune editor, and I worked with him and my undergraduate post my undergraduate work, and then I came out to I had my first think tank, the Health Policy Council, where I was doing futures for the U.S. government on the future of healthcare. And of course, a lot of things we've seen today, such as the impact of promotion, genetics, things that were coming. And then I came out and I joined Apple Computer. And one of the first things I was asked when I joined the first Mac team with Steve Jobs and Wozniak and kind of the crew down in Cupertino was, what's the futurist doing here? And I said, well, I think computers are going to be really important. And since nobody's talking about
in the future, right?
I got to figure it out. So
okay.
That was my first foray. How you become a futurist is, one is there are a couple of university programs where you can get advanced degrees in forecasting and modeling. But this is one of these careers that you really got to either apprentice with people, and then you've got to do forecasts. You've got to be willing to forecast and figure out models and actually do the work. It's a little like being a cabinet maker. You got to make cabinets, and then those cabinets have to be good cabinets. So I've been forecasting and have a decent track record, often wrong, but never in doubt. But when it comes to technology, my entire life has been shaped by innovation waves, and I've had the privilege of being at the forefront of a number of them. So I'm still, it's only been 30 years. I'm still getting a feel for it, Bruce.
It takes a while. Now, I'm assuming you probably make predictions under 30 years. So that means you probably have a scorecard, right? In terms of, but I suppose you can squint your eyes, but how's the scorecard looking?
So I do forecasts in three frameworks, and 1 to 3 years, which is everything from now to the next, 1 to 3 years, and then 3 to 5 years, that's mid-range. So the short range, mid-range, and then long range. And then 10 to 30.
Oh, okay. That's the long range? Or that's the super long range?
That's the long range. Okay. And then every now and then somebody will want me to look at something beyond that. But that's the range. And then my scorecard is pretty darn good, except what's continually happened as we're all kind of living in a post Moore's law universe. Mm-hmm. Things are coming much faster and much sooner, and my forecasts have had to collapse time. I refer to it in order to catch up. But I think that if anything, where my forecasts have been off is that things have happened sooner than I thought, not later, except for artificial intelligence, which somewhat lagged and then finally caught up dramatically in the past couple of years. But I would say it's a pretty good, I would say about 80% of my forecasts have held up, and I've been publishing since 1990, 3 books, and publishing forecasts early on. So about 80% have been pretty good. And I have an unfair advantage. Mm-hmm. So, I get to, when it comes to like IoT or AI or, some of the advanced nanotechnology, I have the unfair advantage is I get to see a lot of things in the labs before they get to the marketplace. So I get to confirm, not all those become products, by the way.
Right.
I do have an unfair advantage, and I use it to benefit my clients around the world.
So it just reminds me of the quote, and I'm sure you're aware of it, from William Gibson, right? The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So that's kind of when you see it in the labs.
That's part of it. That's part of it.
So you've mentioned AI, you've mentioned IoT. So what is your background in AI and IoT?
Well, at Apple in the 80s, I was in charge of business for all vertical industries. I gave the first Macs to NIH and for looking at research and National Institutes of Health, and I did some of the first work on trying to figure out what could computers do that would really enable people. And I led a project that did, as far as I know, the first examination of AI at any computer company. And that was at Apple at the time. Mm-hmm. And this is not, so that was the first approach to all this, was thinking about, what does it look like if we had, digital personas, or I call them DEPs, digitally engineered personalities, that were the front end of computers, because we were building the first interface. Steve Jobs had seen at Xerox, the mouse, and we were interface. And I was saying, well, what if it was animated? What would that look like? So that was a report I did at Apple. Those days, we were very self-managed. And then I became CEO of the first industrial controls company when I left Apple, called UmiCorp, Ultimate Media Corp, based here in California, actually in Larkspur, California.
Mm-hmm.
And we were actually building expert systems, which was an early form of AI. We were programming in assembly language and then burning the rule-based, if this, then.
Mm-hmm.
The first expert systems for the space station, NASA space station, for Ford. And these were fairly crude. We burned through assembly. We actually burned boards, put them in a rack, and you could integrate them into your system. And we had them for clients where you could figure out the rule. There were like 100 to 300 rules for doing certain things in a space station. And if you did these three things, and you'd need to do these three things. So we built those systems. I built those systems in really the late 80s at UmiCorp. And then my background, I left that. It was one of my first exits. And I went on to forming the Institute for Global Futures after a series of other startups. But one of the areas, because of that background, I've stayed with is being close to AI and the developments. And I have advised companies like Google and McKinsey and IBM and about 100 others in both presentations and consulting, trying to figure out, what are the, this is early still in the game, what are the business models and business justification for these technologies, but also what's the possibilities for these technologies to be able to change our world, and the key issues such as autonomy or, controls or ethics or even, what the future of AI might be. And between that and IoT, we've got a lot to talk about because we're just at the early stages.
Yeah, no, we're definitely at the early stages. So you mentioned that you were at Apple in the 80s. So then a lot of people missed the internet as being a prediction. How were you guys, or how were you on that one?
Again,
just the whole internet. That's all. Just the internet.
So you got to remember the internet. We had the internet. So let me dial back a little bit. So being in Washington I was an advisor to Health and Human Services, and my first think tank was focused on health. And one of my fellows for my institute said, "Hey, listen, this is 1970s. It's going to really date me. 1977. A fellow of mine said to me, hey, there's this thing that the universities are doing and DARPA, and you can get a internet account. It's an account to do networking." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about," but so I funded it. And we got a DARPA account, and he said, "Yeah, it's really cool." I said, "What can you do with it?" He said, "Well, you send out this message, right? And again, this is before the internet. It was then, basically run by the Defense Department and academics. And, this is before HTML, before the web. Mm-hmm. You send out an email, and you wouldn't even call it an email. I think you send out a message. Yeah. Guess what? You get it back the next day on the computer. And I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. So I was on part of the DARPA project, and we experimented with all that before there was any GUI or front end or web. But at Apple, again, the unfair advantage, we had email. That's how we communicated between the different offices and within there. And then you got to remember, so we were still, remember, the computer was a big deal. The modems were, you had 1,200 baud, 300 baud modems, and there was no content. So
except these emails.
So, I was getting at the time maybe 20 or 30 emails a day at Apple,
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, at the end of the day, there wasn't a lot of content. There wasn't the web, right? This was an early stage of all this. So, and we were focused on the computer at Apple, as was IBM was focused on, minis and mainframes and HP and the rest of it. So we didn't really get the internet except from an email point of view until later.
Yeah.
So it was evolving, what we were evolving with it. But remember, a lot of this is customer adoption, penetration, and there was no network and content services. And until all that started, there was no VoIP. So all of that was pre the web, pre-VoIP, there was no 2G, 3G, there was none of that. So we miss it? Not really. We weren't ready for it. Keep in mind, the first PDA was at Apple, and PDA, people don't know what that is. Visual Assistant. We had an early model of the iPhone.
Newton, wasn't it? Called Newton.
Exactly. Yeah. And, there was nobody out there.
Yeah, you're kind of like crickets. No, it's funny, and probably a more accurate way to have said it was the web. But I think a lot of people, I'm that old too, to remember my first email. And I was working in my first job in an academic setting, and we were communicating with people professors all the way in Japan. Yeah. It'd be amazing. You'd wake up the next morning, there'd be a message. And it's like, wow, but, going from that to, I guess, more the web, and HTML, like you said, is like just, no, that's mind boggling. But in any case, so IoT now, I have my definition of IoT, and it's probably pretty boring, but is this something that just naturally evolved, or did you kind of forecast it, or what about IoT then?
I've been talking about embedding intelligence at the object layer, both in digital things, and when things wake up. So, and my first book was in '95, Techno Futures. I envisioned a world where we would embed more intelligence into things. And I was influenced at the time. I was on MIT's Media Lab, their advisory board in Europe. And we were already at MIT doing all kinds of really cool things. And then I was at Motorola on their research advisory board. So I was beginning to see, but really the whole utilitarian notion that everything would eventually be networked and be on the internet. Every person, everything, every component. So the notion that you'd have this both virtual and physical proliferation of embedded intelligence, to me, was an early forecast that I made and I believed. And we just were waiting for the network to kind of catch up.
Sure.
And then that was one trajectory. The other was sensors. All a sensor is basically the components of a computer that are programmed around certain ways to capture or if you will sense information. What is that? It's a recognition of information. So that all of that technology was happening at the same time. So you have these different trajectories of the network getting more proliferated, smarter, cheaper. Again, Moore's law. And then, of course, you had new sensing technology, which enabled a lot of that. And then around the same period of time, of course, the geospatial intelligence emerged as a service and as a capability when Reagan declassified. And people don't realize just how dramatic that was. You could have the smartest devices. You could have IoT would have come 10 years earlier if we had not had a classified GPS platform. So in many regards, geopolitics, the geopolitical global state of the world held up the ability of IoT to come sooner, or we would have been talking about this 15 years ago.
Yeah. No, I remember I worked in military simulation type environments, and it was a while after the declassification of the information. But at that time, the GPS data was in, I think, 10 meter, not 10 yard, but 10 meter increments. And now I think it's sub meter for sure. But yeah, it takes a while, and the networking, like you say, had to catch up. But most of the things that we're doing now aren't, specifically with respect to AI and IoT, aren't that bandwidth heavy, are they?
Well, not yet. But again, with my business hat on, you when it becomes, which I would forecast, when companies start to realize that along the next evolution of analytics and big data and cloud is going to provide, I would forecast that we're going to have more network robustness, such as 5G platforms, ecosystems that are tied together. We're going to have more 5G, and let's just say we're going to have more network, bigger faster pipes, and that'll be every place. And all of a sudden, people are going to realize, wait a minute, I can start to capture real time data if I have an IoT network that's designed to capture it and populate it and sense it and analyze it and tied to the cloud. So all of a sudden now you're going to have we don't have the use cases yet and the metrics. So when folks are looking at trying to figure out what all this means to me, before you know it, we're going to have 5G rollout. We're going to have much bigger, faster pipes, and people are going to then be able to see, well, if I'm running, I've got an energy client that's running, he runs energy for serving 15 states, right? It's a rural consortium. And, he said, man, I don't, he says, you got to help me figure out this whole IoT thing, because I got a sense maybe we could run more efficiently. We could use our data more actively, and we could provide more value to our customers. And so we're kind of at, 1.0, IoT 1.0 in the sense of figuring out the models. But while we're doing that, you're going to end up with an infrastructure boost that's going to be very significant.
Yeah, and I think when you say it that way, I agree. And the 5G at first, I kind of made fun of it a little bit, because there were some applications where they're implying that they're actually going to be doing some calculations in the cloud with 5G, and then I realized, no, that's nonsense. But the 5G in let's say autonomous vehicles, that's kind of nonsense. But in some cases, the 5G is really important, and it's the intersection of the Venn diagram between AI and IoT, and that's the models, and being able to take that data from IoT and feed it in, let's say, real time or runtime, and then completely or continuously update the models for AI so that it can in turn make these rapid decisions. And that makes sense to me, right? I mean, that kind of marriage makes sense.
It makes sense, and quite frankly, even with vehicles and transportation, you can't get to where you want to get. So if you just look at cars,
right,
as part of autos that are self-driving, or even we're trying to maximize the safety of driving, right? If you look at cars as a distributed network of IoT nodes, of which are going to be, cars will be all IoT enabled, and they will be constantly pinging in 1/100th of a second off each other, and off of satellites, and off of distributed technologies. And, you're talking now, just take that model, right, of what we do today. Is drive little things, right? Now take that to, 7.2 billion people on the planet.
A lot of networking.
So now take it to objects that are both physical, whether they're wearable objects that are, going to be IoT enabled, or they're literally things that can be wirelessly enabled. And now you're talking about, think about we're still walking into hospitals looking at x-rays, and someone takes the x-rays and, walks them down over here. And then, the things are not connected yet that should be connected. But, when you've got the ability to be able to have this kind of what I call hyperconnectivity, and it cuts across, in other words, IoT is going to enable and be enabled by AI, virtual reality, things even like the blockchain. It's I guess, to answer your first question, the future of IoT, which is short term, it's going to be based on this convergence of other technologies that are going to be based on use cases and competitive advantage. And we can do this now, we couldn't do it before. And I think that's the broader strategy of why IoT is going to be successful, not just because you've got increased network robustness.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. And if you can maybe just give us a sense of where or what is AI good at today, and what's it going to be good at in the future? Kind of give us a spectrum.
Yeah. So what AI is good at today is, one, learning about. It's very good about learning. So it can, AIs right now, whether it's deep learning, machine learning, machine intelligence, very good for they're teachable today, right? You can teach an AI. And what I mean by AI is everything from, neural nets that are used to move trillions of dollars in nanoseconds around the world and for for trading of stocks and bonds and instruments, to doing, deep analysis, to being able to run search engines, to being able to, do decision support for doctors. I mean, everything from cognitive systems to machine learning to, very rote things like chatbots or voicemail, or very mundane things we take somewhat for granted, right? So everything from the most complex, which is diagnosis of genetics and, disease modalities, to big opportunities, and then smaller things that just surrounding us continually every day. Such as how your cell phone works, is a lot of that's enabled by AI. So I'm just going to talk about AI. So where we are today with AI is very good at learning about some stuff. That stuff may be visual. It could be like AIs are tied to the proliferation of cameras on the planet that are watching and identifying either problems or even crime, or looking for bad guys, or for just protecting systems. So they can be trained to look at anomalies in other systems. Is that water container got a crack in it, right? Does my the sensor in your car that says, hey, you got to go fill up the gas, that's a kind of fairly dumb AI, but it's emerging. So learning stuff. Sensors only are really effective if you've got some AI wrapped around them. Okay, we're headed towards an era where more robotics, more self-driving cars, even satellites, everything we have gets so it can get better and learn more. And now we've got AI teaching other AIs about how to optimize things. So that's already happened. That's already started. We have AIs teaching other AIs. And so it's very good about learning, teaching, enabling us humans, cooperating with humans, particularly in medicine, which is very exciting right now. So learning, advising, collaborating around work, particularly around vertical industries, such as I mentioned financial services, I mentioned medicine. They're very good. This is the early stage of kind of I call decision analytics, right? Where you're starting to get advice. Eventually there will be, again, you wouldn't want to be operated on without a Da Vinci today. And what is that? Well, right now it's telerobotic. I would forecast eventually you will have people say, I'd really like to have that AI operate on me. Her track record's a lot, better than these other doctors. And by the way, I've got the analytics. I pulled it off of yourrobodoctor.com. Okay. So eventually we'll have that. So it's very good right now for, as I said, decision analysis, decision support, learning capabilities, monitoring, and then tying those things to alerting humans or alerting other systems when there's a danger, right? Or there's a problem, or there's an inefficiency, right? So that kind of awareness, which is fairly utilitarian awareness, right? The next thing where we're going, of course, is autonomous decision analytics, where we get in real time. We'll each have our 5 to 6 or more AIs that will be part of our life. We'll have AIs for work that will enable us. We'll have AIs in terms of advising us, in terms of families and friends and relationships and health. So eventually you get to the point where AIs will be semi-autonomous, which we have today, but eventually autonomous. So autonomous AI is going to be different. Autonomous AI will operate at a speed, velocity, what I call cognitive velocity, that is not greater than humans. It's just can be applied faster than humans. And to a certain extent, we have that, when you go online, you go searching for things, you're using an AI today. In the past less than 2 years, year and a half, Google has made a dramatic embrace most of what runs Google search engine, increasingly others, and is a form of AI. That was a major acquisition they did. So you have to look at that as kind of the canary in the mine. That's the beginning of an early massification and adoption of AI for all industries, for all businesses, and for all governments, certainly. So where it's going to head in the future of AI is more autonomy, better learning, and I would forecast better help for humans and human problems. So I'll give you a perfect example. So I did a talk for the keynote for the World Bank on the future of creating a digital supply chain, which doesn't exist. So we there's about 1 billion and change of folks on the planet today that can't get the food they need. They're either undernourished or they're in starvation, just in general. Okay, think about that. It's 2018, and we can't get the food. We make plenty of food.
Yeah, we make enough,
but we can't get it because the supply chain is not visible and integrated. And there's no reason why we can't do that. It's a supply chain management issue, or is it? So I gave a presentation with an analysis about that. And really what it is we need to transform and create. There is no digital supply chain for agriculture and food. How about that? So World Bank's very concerned about that. And I said, well, and what would really help is if we had a group of AIs on the platform that were tied to IoT in fields and in all different parts of the supply chain, from seed to product to shelf, right? So that's just an example of people just don't realize that we're living in a world where some of our largest complex challenges facing our civilization, we could be applying AI and IoT together to be able to come up with better solution sets to deal with things that are as fundamental as how we manage water over the next 5 to 20 years. Cape Town has no more water because they didn't plan appropriately in the past decade. We had a tsunami in Asia over the past decade, not even that, and we have technology for sensing and sensors, floating sensors, and IoT. That's an IoT platform, but people weren't using the data. So again, you don't have to think about exotic things like will AI and IoT lead to war of zombie robots taking over the planet. There's lots of use cases that businesses need and our society needs that through the fusion of smarter AI and more integrated IoT, that I think you're talking about just a transformation of some basic things and then transformation of some much other things. We will have AIs that will be winning maybe even Nobel Prizes. We will have AIs that are solving diseases that humans can't. Keep in mind, computers were used to map the original DNA sequence, right? Computers. Then if it wasn't for the network, meaning the internet and computers, we wouldn't have mapped sufficiently the DNA, the first DNA sequence. Now what cost, the better part of $50 million costs, under $1,000. So that's just computers and the internet. What do the next generation of AI, particularly with IoT, could end up accelerating all that and creating a lot more. You could be transformations in healthcare, transportation, certainly in food and ag, but also in fundamental things like how you delight customers.
And that is the end of part 1. I don't know, kind of seems short. But again, this is an experiment, like I said earlier. And I'd love to get your feedback whether or not this is a good way to go or whether I should just keep on going with my full 1-hour episodes. Okay, well, that was episode 110. I like the binary-like number. And it's also made of 2s, 5s, and 11s. To get analysis of this episode, links to anything that were mentioned, plus the transcripts, just go to the show analysis notes. They can all be found at iot-inc.com/podcasts. And remember, if you sign up with the long version of the form, you'll get the transcripts to all the videos and all the podcasts on the site. If you're new to the podcast, subscribe to it. That way you get every episode delivered right to your device. And if you've been listening to it for a little while, there are 4 ways you can support it. You can share it on your blog, personal or company, if you think others will find it of value. You can share it on social. This would be great on LinkedIn and on Twitter. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. To do that, just go to www.iot-inc.com/iTunes. Well, it takes 1 click, maybe a little bit longer if you want to actually write your thoughts. And finally, you can sponsor it directly if your company wants to reach the show listeners, people like yourself, with an audio ad that's read on the show. Contact me. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a predictable one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.